to the Musical Headwaters podcast. I'm your host, DaiAne, and we are here today with Ingrid Stölzel, who hails from Germany, from Karlsruhe, but she has been living in the United States and Kansas for the past 30 years or so. Her music has been performed worldwide in concert halls such as Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, Soul Arts Center, and also numerous festivals worldwide, such as the New Music Festival in South Florida and also the Ritornello Festival in Canada. So welcome, Ingrid.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, lovely to have you. So I would love to begin talking to you about your portrait album called The Gorgeous Nothings. That's kind of how I was introduced to your music, and it's a beautifully made album. Um, and in it, I find there's a big passion for poetry and written words. Yeah, what draws you to poems?
Yeah, and so, as a composer, for me, it's twofold. Sometimes I use poetry in a song cycle, and The Gorgeous Nothings is a song cycle for soprano, flute, oboe, and piano using fragments of Emily Dickinson poems. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But in other times, I use text, quotes, poems to inspire purely instrumental music. So I think, poetry in a twofold way, just for inspiration and trying to capture the emotional landscape of a poem abstractly, and then sometimes also setting the words in a song cycle where I'm really just I try to get out of the way, and my goal is for the music to elevate in some way, shape, or form what the poet's intention is. So those are my two kind of ways I use poetry. And in the case of the Gorgeous Nothings, I was really drawn to these fragments. So Emily Dickinson, of course, has lots of published completed poems, but we also have these snippets of her thoughts written on little tiny pieces of paper and also on like envelope flaps. And when I first came around the facsimile edition of these pictures, I was so drawn into her creative process because we're basically seeing not the creation of the final product of the poem, but we're seeing how something like that would eventually develop into a fully formed poem. And so she crosses some words out, she writes other or sometimes she has multiple words that she's still debating which one she's going to use in the final poem. So that was a really special piece for me because I thought that because they were in completed fragments, that I could contribute and interpret even a little bit more than I would with a completed published poem. And yeah, it was quite fun, and I was also inspired by how those fragments looked. Like she has, when you think of an envelope flap, you have more space on the first line than you do when you get to the bottom of that envelope flap. And so the poem also had the fragment of the poem also had a very specific shape.
Oh, wow.
So I try to get my inspiration from those kinds of things.
When I was reading about this envelope poem, I've never seen the real thing. So is it truly written on envelopes?
Yeah, and so actually in the
Really?
score, and I also make it available at live performances because I wanted to be sort of like a collaboration with Emily Dickinson.
Yeah.
I make those images available, I'm looking at it as I'm talking to you, and so the one that is very just sort of written on this envelope flap. I'll just read. I just read what the
Please.
fragment says. It's quite powerful.
Yeah.
In this short life that only lasts an hour, how much, how little is within our power? And again, the shape is, as we get to the little last space of her handwriting, is power is at the very edge of the bottom of the envelope's flap. And I said, this is the second song in the song cycle.
Yeah.
I also wanted to have a very distinct, short song that captures this this feeling. Basically she's
Yeah.
saying, life is short, and
Yeah.
you can either interpret that, hey, we don't really have a lot of power over it. You can interpret
Right.
it that way, or like make the most of it, and just be in the moment. So I think that's how I interpreted it, and I captured it in a very the song is just about a minute, but I hope it has
Yeah.
that emotional power that she expressed in that fragment. It's again not a completed poem, but it all of these fragments looked very urgent, like she had this idea and she needed to grab whatever she could find. And
Right.
sometimes, like I said, it was an envelope, and other times I have one fragment that she wrote on one of those brown paper bags, that you would like wrap a
Okay.
sandwich in or something like
Yeah.
that. So anything she could find, she would,
Wow.
and that to me was quite special.
Yeah, definitely.
Any time we get insight into another artist's creative process, I think it's quite special.
Yeah.
And yeah, this song cycle is probably one of my most popular ones. It's been sung quite a bit, and that's also why I chose it to be sort of the title. I also love the words, the gorgeous
Yeah.
nothings,
Yes.
because it's again this idea of we might see a sunset, and as she describes, a wheel of birds,
Yeah.
and we might see that every night, and yet it's those little things that just make life special. We might think of them as nothings, but it's just
Right.
absolutely magnificent. So
Yeah. I wonder, do you ever relate to this fragmentary way of creative process for yourself in your musical composition? Is it more of a structured way of creating a piece, or could it be also sometimes fragmentary, like these poems?
well, for sure, not that I'm comparing myself to Emily Dickinson. We're in different, worlds, obviously.
Yeah.
But I do also, I have creative journals laying, around. Like I have one at work and where I teach, and I have, a couple at home,
Yeah.
and it's actually not so much like a melody or something very musical, but I have like some kind of creative thought or something. Or sometimes I'm reading a book, and I love how these words fit together, and I write the words down. And so I, like Emily Dickinson, I try to capture my sort of creative moments, whatever it will be, musical or other, a kind of other inspiration. I try to capture them because they are fleeting. So I
Right.
may, be thinking, oh, I'll remember this. And it just,
Yeah.
honestly, if I don't write it down right away,
Yeah.
it, I remembered I had a great idea, and
Yeah.
it seemed great at the moment, but so I
Right.
also have learned to grab, and I have these journals everywhere, just so I can write whatever
Yeah.
thoughts. And sometimes nothing may come of it, and other
Right.
times I get a commission, for a piece, and they're like, yeah, we want a 10-minute piece for this instrumentation, and then I'm
Yeah.
supposed to come up with what this piece is. And
Right.
my first step is to go back to my creative journal and kind of just read all the thoughts I had of all the cool things I read,
Yeah.
throughout the year, and I have title ideas in there. I have cool sounds that I heard somewhere in a concert. I'm like, ooh, that is a cool sound.
Right.
And I find my inspiration, generally speaking, first in my creative journal, where I just keep track of all those things, all those fleeting thoughts I had, and
Yeah.
that will become a piece. As far as the actual musical creative process, I guess I tend to write more in time, so
Mhm.
not as fragmentary, where I would have like the beginning of something and maybe the end of something. For me, the creative process when I'm in a piece of music is more
Yeah,
beginning to end.
for sure.
um, but yeah, I certainly try to capture these creative ideas as they come.
Yeah, amazing. And also, I was wondering, how do you decide when instrumentation, for example, for this piece it was soprano, flute, oboe, and piano, but how do you come to this decision?
Well, so often it is not my decision,
Okay.
actually, because the commission, as you know, so all I would say pretty much all of my pieces now, this
Yeah.
changes over a career as a composer. You know, when I was a student, I just made up instrumentations, and it was my friends, right? It's like, hey, you know, can we put a group together and I write you a piece, that kind of thing. But
Right.
then, as my career as a professional composer developed, most of my pieces are commissioned. Every
Yeah.
once in a while, I throw in a piece just because I want to do it, but it's rare,
Okay.
just because there's not enough time. And so
Yeah.
this piece was a commission, and from a trio, the Allegres trio, flute. They're an existent trio, flute, oboe, and piano, and they wanted to collaborate with the soprano, who I've also worked with before, Sarah Tannehill Anderson, or just a really incredible soprano. And
Yeah.
so they commissioned. They gave, you know, I knew I had worked with the trio, I had worked with the soprano, and then we put that together for the song cycle.
Yeah.
Same with really most of my pieces. I get the instrumentation and usually a duration for the commission, and
Okay.
then from there, you know, I develop, you know, what kind of piece is this going to be. And sometimes ensembles
Right.
also tell me, hey, we want you know, the inspiration for your piece should be, you know, this.
Right.
So for example, a piece, you know, that's newer than The Gorgeous Nothing is the Livid Loneliness of Fear, which is
Yeah.
another song. um, and it's a through composed. It's not a song cycle, but it's a basically a 15-minute through composed song. And the commissioning ensemble was the American Wild Ensemble, and
Okay.
they were celebrating female American aviators, a part of the
Right.
19th Amendment. Yeah, they just wanted to celebrate. So I knew that, you know, whatever text I would be using would have to kind of fit into their theme. So sometimes ensembles give me a theme to work with, and then I try to work within that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's yeah. If we were talking. You just brought up the livid loneliness of fear, which is you used a poem from Emilia Earhart. The
Amelia
famous.
Earhart, yeah. And so,
Yeah.
what's so lovely is, I actually, when we first talked about it, I had picked Amelia Earhart as the female aviator I was going to, you know, celebrate in my piece,
Right.
because she was born in Kansas, and as you
Right.
said, I teach at the University of Kansas,
Yeah.
Atchison. Kansas, where she was born, is about, you know, 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes from here. And so
Amazing.
it made sense that I would use somebody where I can literally drive to her
Right.
birthplace. Um,
Yeah.
and so I started doing research, and I was talking to the ensemble, and one of the artistic directors of the ensemble said, "Hey, you know, Amelia Earhart also wrote poetry," and I was like, "Really?" And
Yeah.
so then you know, it was clear that I had to use her own words,
Right.
and I ended up using a poem. It's She called it "Courage," And I didn't want to name my piece Courage because,
Okay.
first of all, there's a lot of pieces called Courage. And when you
All
write
right.
about women, then people are like, oh, yeah, courageous women.
Right.
I felt like that wasn't as powerful a title. And so later on in her poem, she talks about the livid loneliness of fear, like when she's up, flying. And I was really drawn to these words. And
Right.
her poem is really extraordinary, and
Yeah.
so that's why. So I'm still using her words for my title. Um,
Yes.
but I didn't call it Courage, which
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I know a lot of pieces, a
Right.
lot of compositions with the name Courage. I just wanted it to be a little bit more like capturing what she actually talks about in her
Yeah.
poem, because it's really
Okay.
quite deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I ended up doing, and it was
Yeah.
really,
That's amazing.
yeah, it was inspiring not only
Yeah.
to celebrate her, but to set her words
Yeah.
to music, and it was premiered during it. We actually had a tour planned, and it was one of
Oh,
those pieces that
wow.
I think, and we were going to perform it at her birthplace in Atchison, but
Okay.
of course the tour was planned for April and May of 2020,
Okay.
and everything got canceled.
Canceled.
And
Yeah.
so the premiere actually happened virtually.
Okay.
And I hope someday, my goal is
For
still
sure.
to have it performed at her birthplace,
At her
and maybe
birthplace.
at some
Yeah.
kind of anniversary or something like that. Yeah,
That would be amazing. So it
yeah.
was in celebration of all female aviators, or?
Exactly, and it was sort of part of a larger celebration of the 19th Amendment, and women being able to vote
Wow.
by the ensemble. But they commissioned a couple of pieces with this theme of female aviators who were already sort of ahead of their time. If you think about Amelia
Yeah.
Earhart, first woman to cross the Atlantic as a
Right.
passenger, and then also some years later as the first woman in a solo flight. And
Yeah.
again, this happened, in the late 20s, 1920s, and then early 30s. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
Amelia Earhart was also, she was kind of an activist for women's rights, not just for female
Yes.
aviators, but just in general. And she used her
Right.
fame. She
Yeah.
used her
In that
fame
way.
to further women's rights. And so I think really a wonderful life to celebrate and like I said, just being able to use her own words was very meaningful to me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased with the recording the American Wild Ensemble made, and I hope this is the newest piece that's been. I've written others that are sort of now getting premiered because of all the delays,
Right.
but this one was put out during the pandemic, and I thought it was a really meaningful piece to put out there with her words, and yeah. So
Yes. Also, a time where everybody needs a bit more encouragement.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a wonderful way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I was also wondering about another piece that is as well on the Gorgeous Nothing album, the Soul Journey, inspired by the three Whitman songs. Um,
Sure. And you started out, you said, I grew up in Germany,
yeah,
and yeah, this year I celebrated my 30-year anniversary of living in the US. And I have to say that for many, many, many years of living and studying in the US, I didn't feel comfortable reading poetry in English,
okay,
because German, I grew up with German, and English was
right,
is still my second language. But
right,
there's something, when you read poetry, you have to really know a language very well
mm,
to get
yeah,
the deeper meanings of things. So for many years, I just didn't set English, and And so Soul Journey, the first song of Soul Journey, Grand is the Scene. It was really sort of my first. Like I read the poem. I mean, I'd been reading lots and lots of poetry, but I felt insecure about setting English. But there was something about that first poem, Grand is the Scene, that was really special. And I knew what he meant. I knew what Walt Whitman meant. And I was like, I have something to contribute to this. And it was also a very, very special commission, a very thoughtful commission from a festival in New Mexico, in Abiquiu, New Mexico. It's a tiny, tiny place, about an hour away from Santa Fe. It's people know it. Sometimes they know of Abiquiu because Georgia O'Keeffe had her ghost ranch there. So the famous painter lived there and had her studio there. So sometimes people know it. But so when they commissioned this piece, this song,
Yeah.
the year prior, the festival brought me out. They played an existing piece of mine. Actually, the road is all. And then they said they wanted me to get inspired by New Mexico, the landscape of New Mexico. And they arranged for like a 3-night stay at this ranch in the middle of nowhere. There was like no, even electricity was all solar. There was no like plumbing, like in normal plumbing. It was all, I had a little cabin, etc. But they
Wow.
wanted, yeah, it was just really thoughtful, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you need like a jeep or like a truck to even get there because it's
Oh,
really
wow.
mountainous, to get there. And apparently, if it rains a lot, you can only get there by horseback. That's what the ranch people told me. So, this was a bit out of my comfort zone, to be
Yeah.
honest, because I'm sort of more used to hotels
City
and things
life,
like that. And
yeah.
my partner Julia went with me, and so we had this 3-day adventure in this ranch. And at this point, I didn't know what my piece was going to be about, but just being out in the middle of nowhere and the just seeing the sky without light pollution, and I honestly had not experienced that because I don't really go camping, right? And so I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
people that are in nature and do the camping out, they probably know
Enthusiasts,
what I'm
yeah.
talking about. But this was my first experience really of seeing the sky, there's the millions of stars, and it was so peaceful. We didn't have cell phone, nothing worked, right? So cell
Yeah.
phone didn't work, internet didn't work. So we were forced to just like really be in nature.
Yeah.
And so then after that experience, I was reading a lot of, people. Actually, I'd asked friends of mine, I was like, I'm looking for pieces that speak to to the universe, to like something bigger than ourselves. And somebody said, hey, you should read Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, which, because I did not grow up in the US, I think maybe it's required reading here in high school. I have no idea. But he was certainly not somebody I had really read deeply. I knew his name and all of that, but I had not read him. And so I read Leaves of Grass, which is an extraordinary collection of poetry. And in it was Grand is the Scene. And it described exactly all those things that I was experiencing while being in this canyon, in the middle of nowhere, that it really is nature, is really awe-inspiring, and it's hard not to feel like there's something beyond ourselves. And that's really what that first song is about. It's like grand is the scene, yes, all the stars and the sky and everything, but grander is the unseen. So meaning, if we do believe there is such a greater thing than ourselves, and maybe like a higher self,
Yeah.
like some people call it a soul. That's what Whitman calls it. That it makes all of those things even grander, even more inspiring. And so, yeah, that's that first song is always going to be very special to me because it was linked to a very thoughtful commission
Right.
where they wanted to inspire me by just throwing me in a canyon, which was amazing, Yeah.
That is
What a great,
amazing.
what a great way of commissioning a composer. Yeah. So,
Definitely.
yeah.
Were they aware of uh, your Whitman and all this when they placed you there, or that
No,
just
no. So all of that. So I first spent time in the canyon and was inspired. And then I was like, I know what I want to write about. And then I
okay?
found, like I said, I reached out to friends and I said, hey,
Yeah.
I'm looking for poetry that is about this kind of theme. What do you think I should read? And from
Oh,
several friends, I got back, you should read Leaves of Grass, and that's then where I found the first song. And then really special, this whole thing came sort of about with the first song, and then the mezzo soprano was like, you should make a cycle out of that. And so I then went, and then the festival commissioned the additional two songs because it was we just worked so beautifully together, and it was clear that it was special. We needed to continue doing that. And so 2 years later, then they premiered the full song cycle, which then is Soul Journey. And so I found two more songs, two more poems that I felt like created a journey, like from that first sort of awareness, perhaps, that maybe there is something bigger than
uh-huh.
ourselves. The
Yeah.
second song um, takes a poem by Whitman, where he's like suddenly so excited. He's like, everything has a soul. The birds, the animals, the plants, everything is alive, right? It's like a celebration of once you recognize it's not just your existence might be larger than yourself, you suddenly see these connections with nature. And so the second song is a celebration of that recognition, the journey of the recognition of everything in everything is connected. I felt like that's what he was saying. And then the last piece
Yeah.
um, is the journey toward the unknown of the soul, so end of life, and going into this uncharted territory. And Whitman wrote it at the end of his life, this particular poem, and it's also a celebration because I do believe that he believed that there is something beyond um, life itself. But he acknowledges that we don't know. This is uncharted. It's just going to be us and our soul, if you believe in that. And so the last song is the end of that soul journey from first. From first awareness to celebration to then the winding down of the transition or the transcendence, as I believe he thinks in his poetry.
Wow.
I had a chance a few years later to even orchestrate that song cycle. And so
Oh.
it exists as both mezzo, soprano, and piano. That's the original song cycle. And then I did a mezzo and orchestra version where I just felt like I could even like express that emotion even more by having more instruments and colors available. So it exists in two versions.
Oh, lovely. Nice. That's such a beautiful flow of events with the experience in nature to the poetry itself, and then to kind of the conclusion and further into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
I have to say that for most of my pieces, it feels like sometimes there's such a just it feels like a synergy, like with the
Yeah.
performers, and we're on the same page, and we're tapping into something that
Yeah.
perhaps is a little larger than ourselves. And
Right.
And in all my years of doing this, I have to. I'm proud to say that I still believe very, very strongly that music can change the world. I've never lost my idealism about the
Yeah.
power of music and the because it changed my life for sure. So
Absolutely.
I'm living proof it changes my life all the time.
Yeah.
I see it in my students, and then also I really do believe. I've had, like, with Soul Journey, I can tell you, and when it's been performed, I've had people come up with me like tears, and how much they experience, especially, let's say, if they're older and they're
Nice.
hearing that last song, and
Yeah.
there's some stirring that can happen. I can't control that audiences will feel that, but I'm hope to put that kind of energy out there, and then if somebody's open to feeling, and
Right.
then that is the biggest, to me, the biggest impact I could
Yeah.
have on an audience. And even if it's an audience of one, if one person is moved, I feel like that's worth it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you come about to becoming a composer?
I mean, I think, to be entirely honest, I was writing music when I was younger. I grew up in a musical family, but I never really thought about it as a career, probably
Yeah.
because I didn't really have real role models. If I think about, like, I learned the piano, and my dad is a tenor, and
Okay.
so I heard a lot of traditional music growing up.
Yeah.
And they were all men, and
Right.
and dead on top of it.
Yeah.
And so I think, not, I don't think it was a conscious effort back then to,
Okay.
like, tell my parent for my parents. They're like, sure, do it, write music, but do it as a hobby, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That was really more what I thought at first, that I would do. And then, I do think it became, and so when I thought I would be a theory major, and then
Okay.
right on the side. But anyway,
Yeah.
it became very clear very quickly that, it can become, I can do it. I just have to decide to do it. And I have to say, the US was very, very good for me. I will
Yeah.
always be grateful for the opportunities that I had here, to be able to experiment. I had very supportive, composition teachers in my
Okay.
life, and I hope to pay it forward now that I'm a composition teacher.
Oh,
um, just supporting a student in their journey of finding, like, what is it that they have to share with the world. And you've listened to my album, so I'm a
yeah.
melodist. I love melody,
Yeah.
and that is not supported all over the world, right? In
Okay.
contemporary music, sometimes, melody not in all areas of the world is that considered acceptable. And but I just knew, early on, that I have a gift in writing a melody and trying to
Yeah.
capture something. And so
Yeah.
the US supported me in this, and my teachers supported me in developing this voice. I guess, a long story, but I think it took me a little while, to figure out that I could do it as a degree, and advanced degrees, and not just as something, I'd be teaching like theory, but writing music on the side. So I'm
Right.
grateful that I can do it full time.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And also, have you ever written with German lyrics or German poetry in mind? Is that something that is possibly coming up also?
Yeah, it's such a thank you for asking that. And so I've
Yeah.
actually shied away from German poetry, but
Yeah.
I just got this commission, and it's such an interesting project. So the Left Coast Chamber Ensemble, they're, in California, in the San Francisco area. They commissioned, I think it's four, or I think it's 4 composers to write sort of companion songs for Luciano Berio's folk songs. So he did a set of folk songs for soprano and chamber ensemble, and where he takes like a folk song from different from Italy and France, and I think he even has a Lithuanian folk song, and he arranges them in sort of very Berio-like, Berio-esque, I should say, fashion. But you can still tell, the melody, and he's very respectful of these folk song traditions. And so they asked me to. The commission is basically to write companion folk songs, 2 folk songs for to be performed together with the Berio. And so again, there was a lot of freedom there for me, and I decided, well, this is the perfect opportunity for me to research German folk songs. I grew up with them because my dad's a singer, and so I settled on 2 evening songs, or they're you could call them lullabies, but they're a little bit more, I think of them more as evening songs. They celebrate the idea of the cyclical nature of life, and they're both, anybody in Germany would be able to like sing those 2 evening songs. They're very popular, and I'm re-envisioning, so I'm using the same text, and I'm re-envisioning the melody in sort of my voice, but I'm using the German poetry, and of course I'm hinting at the folk songs. Perfect question. I'm in the middle of doing that right now,
amazing.
actually,
Yeah.
and it was also initially they had thought it would happen earlier, but now the premiere date will be June of next year, and I can't wait. I also, this is something that I can't wait to share with my parents.
Yeah.
So I didn't tell them about it yet. I want the recording, and just to see what they think, of what I've done with those German melodies. So having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah. So would it be a performance live or a recording?
The plan right now is live performance in June of next year in California, but I'm sure now what I love about ensembles right now is, yes, the streaming was sort of everybody had to do it, in order to put their music out there. But I think people recognize also that it created some accessibility for people, that they may not be able to go to a concert. Maybe they can't afford it, or maybe they live out in a rural area where it would take them 2 hours to get to the concert and 2 hours back. And so I think more and more ensembles are thinking about how can we continue perhaps being able to make our music accessible to more people, yet also go back into the concert venue. Because I have to tell you, I did miss being in front of people, hearing sound coming at me, not through headphones and speakers, but in real people.
In real life,
Yeah. So I hope it's a duality. We're going back to the concert venues, but we're also thinking about how we can make some of these things more accessible to people that don't live in big cities. And there are many things happening in Berlin that I wish I could go to, but unless they stream it, I just can't do it.
But perhaps it would make this language even more global for everybody. So, like you're saying, if concerts here in Berlin are happening, perhaps someone in California will be able to hear and see. So, that could be a great thing for everybody as well. Second option.
Exactly. So I think we're heading that way, but of course, personally, I'm very excited to be in front of musicians again, just as working with real sounds.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, we miss working side by side with each other. I think definitely during this time for a lot of artists and musicians, it's what we miss a lot
Yeah.
about our work.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah,
always beyond the notes.
yeah,
The
definitely.
reality, it's yes, notes and rhythms are important, but
Right.
it's the energy that's created in a
Yeah,
rehearsal. It's the energy that also the vibrations of the instruments sort of merging. That's where the magic happens. And I think that's also where the emotion happens,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and also the community aspect of it and the collaboration. I think as a performer, that I miss a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I do think audiences miss it too. I'm actually
yeah,
of the opinion that, because there were some opinion pieces written like, is this the end of classical music now that
right.
people, don't go to concert? And I think it's the exact opposite. I think we're going to
Yeah,
see more people craving community through music making and maybe making
yeah,
it themselves, or you
right.
I know Germany has such a strong choral community chorus tradition,
Yes.
and everybody's eager to come back and like create together. I'm hoping we can ride that momentum,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
really appreciate what music can do for community and what music
Yeah,
can do for our
for
well-being.
ourselves.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, and to bring people back together again, that's be a lovely thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
really nice. And also, heard that you have a initiative with community outreach, going to prisons, and I'm not exactly clear on the details, but I'm very curious about what you do with
Well,
prisoners.
it wasn't so much an initiative as a project.
Okay.
And unfortunately, often it's funding that's needed to make something long term. And as a matter of fact, we did have long term plans, and then also COVID hit, and
Right.
these kinds of programs were all put on hold. But so it started with a project that was supported by New Music USA, which they're a really wonderful organization in the US that give specific money to a project, to artists, to composers, to performers. My colleagues, so a cellist, Hannah Collins,
Yes.
and percussionist Mike Compitello, and then flutist Sarah Friesov, we put together a project where a lot of groups, for example, they go, at least in the US, the idea of bringing music to prisoners, to inmates, is not unusual. Like,
Yeah.
the Kansas City Symphony sometimes goes and plays, the string quartet plays a Beethoven string quartet for the prisoners.
Yeah.
And it's not unusual to have these kinds of projects. But what we envisioned is a more collaborative project where we would actually go into the prison and create a musical composition,
Oh wow.
with inmates. And so um, we did that, and we went 3 days in a row, to work with 10 selected inmates of the Lansing Correctional Facility, which is in Kansas. And these inmates had a little bit of background in music. Some were, rapping and doing hip hop, could like really come up with incredible
Yeah.
lyrics.
Right.
Others were like rockers, they and we even had a violinist.
Oh, incredible.
He had learned the violin in high school, and the prison does provide some instruments, and so we designed a kind of a workshop with them, where I would present a piece, and it was actually premiered in the prison, and use that idea of that piece as a kind of way to compose, to a composition workshop with them. So my piece was The Voice of the Rain, and it's again a poem by Walt Whitman. And I decided, even though it's instrumental, flute, cello, and percussion, I decided that having a poem to share with the inmates, would help me explain why I did what I did in the piece of music. Right. And I try to find a poem, because not that I know what it would feel like to be incarcerated. I don't know what that would feel like, but I imagined that what they would need to hear is some kind of hopeful kind of message, or something that's not, I didn't want a poem that was a downer, right? And I also didn't want to be something that's like fake, happy, because I don't think that's real for them either. So I chose a poem that uses nature again, the voice of the rain. It's the cyclical idea of the rain falls, it evaporates, it nourishes the earth. It has a cyclical nature. And I think Whitman, in this particular poem, talks about how when we put something out there, and specifically, I think he talks about the creative process and putting love out through a poem. And I believe in that as well in music, like putting an energy out there, it cyclically comes back to us. And in some way, whether it's recognized, he says, whether it gets to be recognized by people or not, it does come back to us as love.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked this poem and I explained what I was doing, and the musicians, played the piece for the inmates, and it was such an amazing experience, because they resonated with this idea so much that we started writing our own words, and we improvised with the musicians, and then they wrote like a 12-minute
Wow.
composition, and we used graphic notation so we could all play
Okay.
and perform together. So saying like, hey, here's this section, we're going to do this kind of thing, everybody play,
Wow.
and then we performed that for their entire inmate population,
Right.
in a concert. It was truly one of the such a special and life affirming experience working with these inmates, because it was so amazing to me, because all they wanted to do and talk about is music, right? We never talked about,
Wow.
why are you in here? We never talked about how horrible prison is, and I'm sure it is, right? I know it is.
Right.
We just talked about music and emotion. They were so open to talking about what they want to express, and the piece that we ended up writing with them, though they wrote, we just facilitated, was about missing home. And one of the common denominator of these 10 very diverse, they came from very different backgrounds, and they have very different stories, very clearly different stories of why they're there. um, the common thing that they all had in common, that they could really hone into, was they really miss being home with their friends and their families. And so it was a very powerful experience, and first time I've ever done something like that.
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Incredible.
yeah, I was very nervous,
Wow.
because
Yeah.
it's also 10 big men, right? And so when we
Right.
first went there, and
Yeah.
and my friend Sarah, the flute player, she was pregnant at the time, and we're
Okay.
like, are we, is this, how are we going to feel like going
Yeah.
into this prison as
Right.
women working with 10 men? But
Yeah.
it really, the first experience I had, like when one of the prisoners came up to me, they showed me like, here's all the songs I've written. They had like a whole folder of
Oh,
like
wow.
kind of more Christian inspired, like progressive rock songs,
Okay.
and they wanted to tell me how much they love music. That was the first, and I immediately felt of course there's guards of, you imagine
Yeah,
it's still a
sure.
prison, but their energy
Yeah.
was such that they were just so excited to be doing something, different, and to be able to be in music for a couple hours, a few hours a day, because their life there is, they don't have choices, right? They don't have a lot of beauty in their life in prison. They
Right.
just don't. And
Yeah.
it was so clear how starved they are
Yeah.
for something like meaningful and beautiful and something they can express themselves in. So these programs that, there are a few in America, in the US, where, people bring music to prison. It's so important.
That's
um,
amazing.
yeah, the
Yeah.
artistic director of this overarching program in Kansas, it's called Arts in Prison. She said something really, really meaningful to us, like in the first time we met. She said, you can either, so some of these people will be in prison for most of their life, others will have a chance to leave, right? And she said, they can either leave prison with more love in their hearts or with more hate, you know so if we don't foster the love and foster, and I think art and music and making them feel, like they matter,
Right.
that if we don't do that, then of course we send them out into the world, and of course most likely they will end up back in prison because we didn't foster a different sense and feeling in
Right.
them. So yeah.
Wow. What was it like in the working process with 10 men and in a prison setting? How was
Yeah,
that?
so we were in the prison chapel, right?
Okay.
So that's where they had a couple of the other instruments, some more guitars and some bongos and things like that. And the hardest part, I think, that we all didn't really know was just getting into a prison.
Yeah.
Like you have all the instrument, like everything has to be scanned, and it's really, the security is incredibly tight. And of course, I had no idea what I was doing because I wrote for marimba. A
Right.
marimba, and so imagine having to take that marimba apart, and then it has to go get scanned through the,
Wow.
again, I had no
Yeah.
idea. And so we learned a lot. Like it would have
Right.
been much easier if I had written for like a small, like glockenspiel or something like that.
Yeah.
um, and so there were like technical, like practical things that we had just really
Right.
no idea what and we had and then in terms of the actual work, we had worked together. It's like, hey, here's our plan. We want to have an icebreaker kind of thing where they tell us about their earliest musical experience. And it was unbelievable because they
Oh,
immediately broke open, right? And they told
yeah.
us about their most deepest emotional, like, experiences of music and what it meant to them. And we didn't know how that would go, like that kind of icebreaker thing.
Yeah.
And then the second thing we did with them was an improvisation. So
Right.
even before we talked about how music is put together, or like, let's all just make sounds. Let's just all come together and make sounds, and we did it on a theme, an emotional theme, and it was really truly, I think all of us finished, that improvisation, and we're all like, oh, that was amazing, right? And that there was an
Yeah.
immediate level of trust. And I think every day we came back, it just really fostered that trust. And here's a magic little, I know I'm talking a lot about this project, but there was some magic happening too, because the last day, so the last day, then we come, and it's the night of the concert, right? Where all the inmates then come together in the chapel, like not just the ones that had been working with us, but their cellmates and their block
Oh,
mates, right? And we get there, and there's huge. So this is in the middle of Kansas. There's these huge thunderstorms rolling in, and the rule in, because they have all these metal, security systems. When there's lightning within like 3 miles of the prison, nobody gets to leave their cells. And so we're in the chapel, like we're like getting ready to, and they shut down the whole prison because there's lightning strikes, within a few miles away. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, if we don't perform tonight, we don't get to perform for,
Right.
And long story short, it was kind of touch and go because again, the rules. But one of the prison guards, a woman, had she saw our instruments getting scanned. We're going through the scanner still, and etc. And she's like, "Oh, is this a cello?" And and Hannah
Right.
goes, "Oh yeah, this is a cello."
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, I played the violin when I was younger, in high school."
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, "We gotta like it." She was the one that she was sort of like a head guard. Because she loved music and because she grew up playing an instrument, she knew how important music was and how important this event was going to be.
Yes.
That she sort of unilaterally said, that storm is moving another direction. Let's just make this happen.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
and it was again somebody that had some kind of like emotional experience with music that made the decision that we could move forward. And it was really a magical
Right.
event. And all the inmates, and because they don't have cell phones and they don't have a lot of entertainment, it was the most attentive audience I've ever had a premiere in
Oh,
front of.
amazing.
Like, it was silent, like they were just like, yeah, it was really
Wow.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the performance was their own compositions, or
Yeah, so we
yeah.
played one of my pieces, and there was another, so the Voice of the Rain, and then we played a piece by Daniel Pesca. He's a wonderful composer. He lives in Baltimore. Also, for the three instruments that we brought in, then we had the group composition. And then what we decided to do also is, because several of the inmates had written a kind of like, either like I said, progressive kind of Christian songs. One had written a kind of more hip hop song. And what we did is we arranged them to have cello and other flute in them. And so
Yeah.
we've all performed their songs with additional instruments, and that they've never heard. I mean, they've never heard a cello solo in one of their compositions. And then we recorded them for them, and we were able to share them with the inmates. So that was like sort of the concert was the combination of two more contemporary
Yeah.
compositions, traditionally notated, a group improv, and then a few of their songs that we arranged to include all of us
Oh,
as
wow.
a ensemble. Yeah.
Right. That's incredible.
It was really, yeah, it was very, very special. And, I had the best colleagues, and like we really was, it was really not, it's not my project. It was really like, we really worked as a unit
Yeah.
to be the best possible experience for those inmates. Yeah, it was quite special.
Ongoing project would or
So, I know arts in prison is an ongoing thing, and so they do have a choir there, and they do have. I'm sure things are starting back up, and they had some theater productions there and some poetry workshops. So the organization Arts in Prison is certainly continuing. We were hoping to have a more ongoing presence in a composition workshop, but it is tricky, because obviously funding and time, finding the time to go.
Yeah.
And so it was very helpful to have a grant to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I hope that we can do it
In the
again.
future. Yeah.
And it would be great to find sustainable money.
Yeah.
Not again,
Definitely.
it's not about us getting paid. It's just you need money to make projects work. It's just,
Yeah.
people are, organizations like Arts in Prison, they have staff members, and
Right.
you need, they need to be compensated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks so much for talking about all the things that inspire you in poetry. I don't think I knew so much about Emily Dickinson and also Whitman, especially. I had never came across his poetry before. So thanks for introducing me also to these amazing pieces of writing that otherwise would have been lost to me.
Well, I really appreciate all your questions, and it's been really fun.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.